The Bob Murphy Show, episode 412.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Bob Murphy Show. Another crossover. This time, Adam and I are giving you a twofer. We are analyzing the key moments from the recent Soho Forum debate on immigration, featuring Dave Smith and Nowrasteh. And then we go through more methodically several clips from Michael Malice's recent appearance on Brett Weinstein's Dark Horse podcast, talking about anarchy, egalitarianism, and so forth. So really interesting stuff. As always, even if you've seen the thing, it's even better if you have seen the things and you've heard some other commentary, because you're going to get the best commentary here. Here we go.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
You know, a lot of people have been throwing some soft criticisms at you and I. Like the only thing that we can do is take a conversation or something that happened in the previous week and then just, analyze it to death. And I want you good folks to know that that's just not true. Some weeks we do two conversations and analyze them to death. So do you want to tell the good folks what we will be talking about this week?
Yeah, so one issue is the Dave Smith, Nowrasteh, I think I said it right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Debate at the Soho Forum. We're going to touch on that, and I think it's going to be a light touch that we're just going to put our finger on what we think was the essential disagreement or thing that needed to be resolved. And then we have a bunch of clips from Michael Malice was recently on the Dark Horse podcast talking to Brett Weinstein. And so we got a lot of clips there, and that has to do with anarchy and related issues that Malice talks about a lot. So that's what you're in store for, folks. I think you're going to like it.
I think you're going to love it. All right. We got a lot to get through, so let's just
can I say one last thing, Adam?
You may.
Folks, on the Human Action podcast, which I'll eventually update. If you're watching this right now on the Bob Murphy Show, I'll put in the links when it drops. I am going to go more methodically through the Soho Forum debate because I'm going to reference a lot of the papers that Alex has written, because some of the stats he was throwing out, I'm not saying they're wrong, but you should take it with a grain of salt, like the framings. Anyway, but I will defer all that kind of stuff for the solo episode I'm going to do on the Human Action podcast. Adam and I are going to just talk about big picture stuff here.
All righty. Sure, save all the gems for your own show, Bob.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, here is Dave. I think this is during his opening remarks, which were a banger. Here we go.
Fundamental point that I think libertarians need to understand here about whether our position should be open or closed or anything in between is that this all comes down to the issue of government property. Governments are the ones who control the borders. Now, there are some areas of the U.S. border that are privately owned. And by the way, the people who privately own that land have been demanding that the government serve its only legitimate function and protect private property and protect them from trespassers, for which the government has not been doing its only legitimate job. But the point is that many libertarians will act as if it's a given that there ought to be no restrictions on government property. But that simply isn't true. It's not deduced from libertarian principles, and none of us would apply that standard in life in general. Alex shared recently, as this debate was coming up, he shared a meme, which I'm not holding him to the argument of the meme. I understand he can present his argument tonight. But I did think there was something interesting about this. He shared a meme, and it was on my side of the meme was all the mental gymnastics you have to do to be a libertarian to support closed borders. And it's Manette taxpayers, or they're going to vote for Democrats, or a bunch of different steps. And on Alex's side, it was just one guy who said, government property is illegitimate. And it's okay. Now, I understand that's not exactly your argument. My point is just that many of the people who argue for this lax immigration policy, they act as if that's the pure libertarian position. But ask yourself, is that really the pure libertarian position? Is it the case that if the government is currently in control of some property, that therefore there ought to be zero restrictions? If that were the case, then public schools could not tell a random 55-year-old drug addict that he can't enter the school and hang out in the girls' bathroom. Why? Would you restrict someone's freedom of movement? Would you say that all government property, you should be able to scream obscenities in a public library, that you should be able to lay down and camp out in the middle of a freeway? Is it wrong? Is the libertarian position that since a government has control of a highway, therefore they cannot institute a speed limit? That the speed limit ought to be whatever you can do? I don't think that actually follows. I think that if we recognize that taxation is theft, and we recognize that governments are built off aggression, they built and maintained public property with tax dollars that they took at the threat of violence from the American people. And what the American people want them to do with those tax dollars ought to play somewhat of a role. Now, I'm not arguing, as some other libertarians have, and I think they overstate the case a little bit, that public property is owned by the taxpayers or owned by the net taxpayers. I'm simply arguing that the American people have a better claim than others do, which is really, I think, the fundamental, what property rights kind of starts as. But the idea that if the American government is doing something, it ought to be for the American people. It ought to be in their interest. If there is a local public school and there's a group of people in the community who have been paying property taxes into this school for many, many years, I think that school ought to serve those people's interests and not equally the interests of the world. Look, there's nowhere in libertarian principles where you can deduce that because I stole something from you, it is now unowned or owned equally by everyone in the world. If taxation is theft, and everything that the government has built and maintained has been done so by robbing the American people, well then, the rightful owners are still the American people. Let's say there's a government, could be a foreign country, let's say it's in Sweden. Yeah. The government is doing something me and you would both agree it shouldn't be doing. Yeah. And let's say you're there and you convince them all with your superior arguments. You know, the government has a factory and it's producing shoes. And Alex, you convince them that this should be privatized. Like, the government doesn't need to be in the business of making shoes. The market will do it much better. This factory should be privatized. And there were two proposals for privatization that were on the table. And so proposal A was, I don't know, something like, we're going to privatize this company and all of the taxpayers will get like a share in it, or the people who homesteaded it will get a share in it or something like that. And then proposal B was, we're going to privatize this company and it will 100% be owned by a Chinese firm. That had nothing to do with paying the taxes, nothing to do with building it, none of that. Is one of those proposals preferable to the other?
Depends whatever gets the maximum price. Whatever you sell the asset for at the highest price, which will partly, hopefully, compensate the poor Swedish taxpayer who's had to suffer, at least for a tax rebate for the crappy government shoes they've had to wear for so long.
Wait, but hold on, Alex. I just want to be clear on this.
So whatever maximizes the price.
Hold on. So I want to be clear on this, okay? So if the taxpayers are forced to build something, you do not think that they have any better claim on that? Like, in those two scenarios, everyone in this room cannot say that there isn't one that's clearly preferable, which is that the taxpayers who have been forced to build and fund the maintenance of this thing get it, rather than some Chinese company who had absolutely nothing to do with it. They just get it. It just seems to me, Alex, like the answer is so obvious, but you just don't like the implication of what that answer would be.
I'm thinking like an economist who believes in getting maximum price for the assets that you sell. Obviously, I think the Swedish government should get the maximum price it can for the assets it sells and use that to do a rebate on the taxpayers of Sweden rather than trying to give it up.
Okay, but that second part, kind of sneaks out.
Some kind of like centrally planned scheme.
Okay.
We see countries around the world try to privatize state-owned assets for the schemes that you justify, and it doesn't work. It didn't work.
Hold on. But it would
There's
go
a
as
lot of other things going on here.
Alex, but it would go as a rebate back to the taxpayer. So like if I were to steal money from you and buy a house and then I'm out of money, it's rightful that it should go to you. It should just go to whoever I can get the most money for. But you see, he snuck in there on the condition that I'm giving the money back to you afterward. So that's kind of okay, why? Why should the money go back to the taxpayers?
Because they own it. Because they got fleeced.
Do they?
Because they got fleeced.
Oh, that's interesting
Because
that
they
you
got
said that,
fleeced.
Alex. You heard it here. That's all I needed.
Let's
Because
think
they
about-
own
let's-
it.
let's
That's
think
right, Alex. They sure do.
Yeah. And let's see how they vote with their dollars, ladies and gentlemen. Not through their politicians once every 5 or 6 years, but through their tax dollars. What do? They buy goods and services from immigrants. Nobody believes this story about government ownership of property and them trying to behave like private owners.
Okay, so great. We got those two, and that's, folks, just so you know, that's all I needed, for the big point I want to make on this. So, but go ahead, Adam. I think you want to react first.
Yeah, let me take the first stab at it. This whole argument, and it was great, and it went back and forth, but it just reiterates a pretty basic point, which is that public property is just an abomination before God and man. It should not be, and I think the position of minarchists who think you can have a stable society with a night watchman state or whatever, there's a problem that each individual can't define what they think should go in the night watchman state. But besides all that, you have a problem that this public property is stolen by the state, stolen from the citizens. Their tax dollars fund everything they do, and they carve out pieces of land and declare it's publicly owned. But all the people that it was stolen from, it's the state that manages what happens on this land, and the citizens don't agree on what should happen on this land. And even worse, they never agreed, all of them, to own this public property in common. It's just a huge violation, and it's a glaring, discordant thing that does not fit in the minds of minarchists, I believe. I think you need a stateless, completely voluntary, private property, free association society to have anything like order. You can't get there when the monopoly state owns things.
Yeah, I agree. And on this stuff, I'm not trying to be wishy-washy, folks, but I really do think we can, the search is over, and I can just say there's not going to be any good solution. There's no correct way for the state to administer stolen property.
Right.
It's, again, the analogy, if the Soviet Union leaders had come to me and, well, for one thing, I would have been young, but it had said, how many grocery stores should we have? You're an economist. I would say, well, you should privatize everything. He said, yeah, we're not going to do that. But, what does economics say about, and you see the problem. So let me try it this way. I really like this framework that Dave has brought up, and I had him on the Human Action podcast a while ago when he was really getting into the immigration issue, and he spelled this out, and I was pleasantly surprised because I had gone in there thinking I was going to, take pot shots and be, in a fair way, but I thought, okay, you're going to do this, but I'm going to play devil's advocate. And I really just had kind of one line of pushback, which, is a serious one. But anyway, he did a really good job. I thought of just saying, this is one way to think about it. And it's for sure, I think what Dave has done, if nothing else, is to show you could be intellectually honest and say, I am a libertarian and I don't believe in open borders. Whereas, that's the way the open borders libertarians try to frame it. Like this is crazy. How are we even having this conversation? Okay. So let me do it this way, folks. In terms of self-described libertarians who care about property rights, they're not going to be arguing about empirical studies, regression analysis of how much, how much does GDP rise or something like that, or what's the crime rate. That's not an issue, or people voting Democrat or something. That's not really the issue. It's about rights and principles. And so what I wanted to show here is how I think, again, we gave you a snippet in this, what we just played, but if you watch the whole Soho debate, you can see this issue came up several times. So let me do this, that I'm going to show you how I think Alex was trying to take Dave's framework and show this is crazy. Look at you could do anything with this. That's clearly not libertarian. So this framework has to be wrong. And I think I'm going to show you, yeah, that sounds reasonable. But then I'm going to go to the other end and show an example of Dave's framework where it's clearly correct. And so something's screwy here, right? Okay, so the two, and I'm not even taking a stand. My point is, since both sides can plausibly say this framework is either obviously wrong or obviously right, something's screwy here. And I think the answer is because we're like dividing by zero at step 3 by having the state try to administer something correctly. Okay, so from Alex's point of view, he could say, okay, Dave, the state's owns the roads, and we're just going to talk about public property and the rules that the state's going to set on that. When in principle it can, because hey, it's administering it. And if anybody, according to a reputable court, is found to be a large-scale distributor of heroin, then that person is not allowed to use any public property, period. If they're in their house, we're not going to send armed men in to grab them and put them in a cage. But if you at any point step foot on a road or into a post office or the DMV, blah, 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 I'll take your pick. If you try to go down and get married and you go show up at the Justice of the Peace's door, have a kid and you want a birth certificate, any of that kind of stuff, then you go to jail for stepping on public property and, having the condition that you're a convicted heroin dealer. Okay. And see, and to back it up, I can poll the American people, the taxpayers who paid for the roads and the Justice of the Peace's office and blah, 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 and the paper that's used to print the birth certificates. I can poll them, and overwhelming majorities do not like large-scale heroin dealers. They really don't, and they're fine with this policy, especially because we're not throwing them in a cage if they just mind their own business, right? You could do that, and it's not obvious that that's a deviation from the principles Dave laid out, and yet I think I'm showing, Alex could plausibly argue, I could justify any policy that's clearly non-libertarian in any sense that any libertarian in the last 100 years meant by the term. And so clearly this framework is way too powerful that Dave's invoking. Okay? And then, bear with me, folks, here. On the flip side, Dave could say, to show the weakness of Alex's constant appeal to, hey, these are voluntary transactions, the immigrants, they're selling their labor to willing buyers who are Americans, and they're spending their money on goods and services sold by willing vendors who are Americans. And so immigration restrictions are just the busybody government getting in the way of voluntary transactions, and we as libertarians should oppose that, right? Okay, suppose, forget immigrants, just in general, a bunch of either, pro-Gaza activists or climate change people or whatever, just camp out on the interstates such that traffic comes to a standstill because there's just literally hundreds of people in front of you, just a mass of people just camped out, and then you can't move. And then, you call the police or whatever, the police say, no, we can't interfere with their freedom of movement. Who are we to physically coerce them? And then given that you're stuck there, and you're thirsty, and some of the climate protesters come up and they have some lemonade. And they say, hey, you want some lemonade for $1? And you're like, okay. And so you could see voluntary transactions occurring. And would it make sense for Alex to say, aha, see, this is all voluntary, and I don't care if you polled the American people and 95% said, we want the cops to move these protesters off the interstate so we can drive again. I don't care. That's just this weak appeal to democracy. Who cares about what the majority thinks? It's as long as there's one person who wants to buy that lemonade, he is showing that he benefits from those protesters being there. And who are we to block that voluntary commerce, right? The fact that they're engaging with those people through trade shows they want them to be there. Okay, so you can, I hope, see, no, that would not follow there also. And so then the question is, number one, I guess so clearly the immigration issue falls somewhere in between those two extremes. And depending, I think both of them, one person looks like an idiot and the other person looks, oh yeah, that's reasonable. And it depends how you change it. Notice though, that's the same framework that's allowing me to paint either of those scenarios. And so I'm not even taking a stand. I'm just curious what you think, Adam, too. But again, I'm just saying that, laying this out, that libertarians who really care about this stuff, I would like us to discuss what I just laid out there and explain, is there some clean way to say, oh no, one of those ends of the extreme is wrong because of X, Y, Z?
No, that's a great point, Bob. And I think both Alex and Dave's frameworks fall askew somewhat, because at the heart of it is this abomination, this public property thing that shouldn't exist. Dave gave a great example real early in his opening statement that Alex just never addressed, and I don't think Dave brought it up again, but the America's got 350 people in it, and the government controls a whole bunch of public property. And piggybacking off the potentially nuclear conflict between Pakistan and India. He's like, well, what if Pakistan drops a couple nukes? And because we have free, open borders, 500 million Indians, proper Indians, show up and just come in and occupy our public property, because we don't have any right to say that that's wrong. Does Alex really want to say that he's comfortable with that, or take it to something much more picturable? Imagine a small town, 4,000 or 5,000 people, and they have paid their taxes and with those taxes, the government's made the public park, and the city hall and all these little public, the roads. And what if 100,000, I don't know, Somalis or something just walked across the border, because we believe in open borders, and they just started camping out on the parks and the public sidewalks? Does Alex really want to say that that no harm is being done to the citizens of that small town because someone walked in and is using the public spaces in a way that they, clearly don't want? I don't think he'd be comfortable saying that.
Right. And even to the fact that the Soho resolution said, I forget the exact wording, but it was like the U.S. government either should or should not allow the movement of people who don't have any communicable diseases and no violent criminal record or something like that. You know what I mean? So even there, Alex was not really biting the bullet and just saying, no, I don't think the government should have anything to do with, where like for a drug legalization debate too, if it said all drugs should be legalized except really hard ones, well, then you'd say that's kind of wishy-washy. We're kind of dodging the hard, you know what I mean? So I guess what I'm getting at is, among other things, as the COVID era showed us, if you give the government that the opening the door and saying, oh yeah, if there's a health risk, then you can stop people at the border. I mean, they could go to town with that, right? So there's that element as well, that it's, I think, again, there's no way to properly do this. Can I ask you this, Adam? One thing that occurred to me as I was grappling with this, if you noticed in the debate, all of the really scary things and like pulling at your heartstrings that Alex was referring to, all involved taking people who had been here for a long time and were married and had kids and jobs and ripping them away and forcing them out of the country, grabbing them. Whereas it seems to me, what if, at the very least, what the government did was say, we are going to really fortify the border and, other entry like airports and whatnot, and really try to prevent unauthorized people from entering the country. But then once you're in, we can remain agnostic as to what should happen there. And because I don't think anybody would have this visceral reaction like, oh my gosh, that's such an outrage against humanity that, there's a wall or a fence or something, and they won't just let anybody walk in, that they'll stop you and say, no, we don't want you in here. Turn around. Whereas again, finding somebody who's been here for 5 years and has a kid and stuff, and then ripping him apart and sending him back, especially like these crazy stories about like kids that came here when they were real, the dreamers or something. And like some kid, like he's clearly American. You talk to him, he has an American accent and stuff. He grew up here, and then say, oh, you're going to go to some country you've never, you don't remember that you were born there when you were well, you were born there when you were 0 months old. You left there when you were 6 months old. So anyway, and I suppose just to anticipate, people might say, well, no, Bob, if the potential illegal immigrants knew all they got to do was get over the fence and get in, and then they're home free, there'd be huge waves and we couldn't repel them all. It'd be like Space Invaders. Maybe. But anyway, how do you feel about my modest proposal of really fortify the border and just say for sure we're going to try to stop you from getting in, and then once you get in, it's not obvious what happens to you?
Yeah, with the preface that public property is an abomination. I like your proposition quite a bit. Maybe I would add something on there with, no matter how many years you've been here, if you're a violent criminal, maybe kicking you out would be a little easier. But my intuition is the same as yours and probably most people. If you've been here a while and you're just a hardworking individual, not a problem to anybody, I don't want you kicked out and thrown out of the country. You're exactly the sort of person I want here. In general, I do think that we get richer when more people come here who want to just pay their own way, not be a burden on anybody, contribute to the division of labor. I think we get richer and more prosperous and more successful, unless we run out of land or something like that. But we're nowhere near that. If you don't mind, I want to piggyback or jump back a little bit to that Sweden example.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a mic drop moment, and you could tell at the very end there, Alex's last sentence or two was just a string of gibberish about how Americans spend their tax dollars, and rather than voting, he was wrecked. And I agree. I think it was completely bizarre that if a free market economist were to come upon, say, Sweden, and they had a factory that was all socialized, and they were convinced that it should be privatized, that the immediately thing you do is, rather than give it back to the taxpayers you stole it from, you sell it to the highest bidder. My reductio ad absurdum brain just immediately said, well, what if the population of Sweden itself had been enslaved by their government, and somebody came along, a free market Milton Friedman type, and said, yeah, that probably shouldn't be it's not ideal for your society. You'd do better if these people were not slaves. And so would Alex come along and say, well, the thing you need to do is not give them back ownership of themselves, but put them all on the auction block, Libya style. And so, well, whoever fetches the highest dollar amount. And if it turns out to be China, well, don't worry, we'll give the proceeds to the slaves, but they still have to be. It's so weird that he doesn't, like, for you and me, I think the reflexive kernel is, whose property is it? Private property rights foremost and forthright and up front and center. And I don't think he thinks like that. He immediately went to, just whoever can pay the most. That's the most economically efficient thing when we're talking about, governments stealing taxes from people and building factories with it. I mean, that struck me as really weird, and also a devastating hypothetical from Dave.
Yeah, so it definitely was the most decisive moment of the debate. And like, you could even hear people, I don't know if it came through folks watching us now on our playing here, but watching the thing, at the main site, you could, like, the audience, there were some people that were like, oh, like they knew, the crowd knew something happened there. And you're right that Alex, I think, was trying to do damage control when he realized, oh, wait, did I say something wrong? So where Alex... You're entirely right, Adam, and I think your slavery example really just hits the nail on the head. So where Alex is coming from is, again, just thinking like a typical economist, and sort of like, oh, if the government, like the U.S. government right now has a bunch of oil, like there's some in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and then they have a bunch of mineral rights and stuff. And so the idea is, if on the margin we're just going to privatize some of it, what's the best way to do it? You say, oh, yeah, you sell the oil at the market price and then get the money and then rebate it to taxpayers, or have the deficit be lower, as opposed to like mailing every American a barrel of crude oil. Like, what the hell am I going to do with this? Right. So that's kind of the idea. And that's why he said that.
You can't mail a barrel of oil, but you can mail them a share of barrels of oil, right? That fits in the mail.
Well, you could mail a barrel of oil if Lysander Spooner was still in operation.
Yeah, that's true. Did you know if you go to Hawaii, you can actually pick up a coconut and just take it to the post office, and they'll mail the coconut back home to you or to whoever?
Not only do I not know that, I'm wondering why you know that.
Because I was in Hawaii once, and it's a thing. The cute thing is there's kids on the side of the road that are selling you coconuts, and they'll tell you that this is a thing, and here's your coconut. But if you like step 2 paces into the jungle, literally, there's the same coconut just lying on the ground because they fall off the trees.
Huh. And then do you put your mail in the coconut and then say, you
put the lime in the coconut and then you drink it all up, Bob.
Oh, okay. Back to the Sweden thing. After that fun diversion, the thing, you're right. The thing that Alex, I don't want to say he's missing, but right. If the idea is, what are all the taxpayers going to do with one share of stock in this company? They could then sell it to the Chinese firm.
Or wherever, they'll make arrangements.
Right.
The market will operate.
Right. So rather than trusting the government to administer the auction properly and then make sure all the money, that there's not a leaky bucket. And we had the auction proceeds, but then 15 different managers had to deal with it, and and then this went over and so forth.
By the way,
property.
I'm sorry, Barb, but I think, before I lose my train of thought, I think Dave had to sort of pressure Alex into saying that the money would go back to the taxpayers. I think it was a little back and forth before he actually said that. I think in his mind, the proceeds would just go into the government coffers and be used for the the public weal. I don't even think that Alex was thinking that necessarily that anything had to go back to the taxpayers.
I would need to go look at the clip again. It's if Alex were saying that, I don't think it was dragged out of Alex against his will. I think in his mind it was just so obvious that of course you sell it for the highest price. That's what you do. That's what economists always tell you to do. You know,
it's a mindset. Yeah,
it's hard. It's hard.
It's not my mindset.
Yeah.
You know.
And Alex, there was a lot of weird stuff that happened with the privatization after the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And so, which doesn't they tried a bunch of stuff. They did just auction stuff. They also just gave shares to people and things, and it was all corrupt. So it's, whatever. I'm sure Alex could show, oh, they tried Dave's approach in this 5 different ways it failed. And I would just say, right. But also they tried it your way too. And that also was corrupt and, benefited the oligarchs.
One of the many things, fleshed out in great detail in Scott Horton's new book, Provoked, is that whole thing where the Harvard boys went over to the former Soviet Union and just completely screwed up in advice.
It's my understanding
that system.
That Scott, for that portion of the manuscript, emailed it to an economist that he knew who vetted it.
A certain economist, I'll be darned. Yeah. Who? Any clues? Any insight?
Who's got 2 thumbs and was that guy?
That's awesome. That's awesome. Shall we pivot?
By the way, folks, if you're watching the video, I didn't pull my hands up because my AI camera, that's kind of the signal to it to start scanning my room. So that's why I'm not moving my hands around that thing. I'm not even making a joke.
Really?
Really?
That's interesting. I did not know that.
Yes.
I just thought
it has happened on other shows, where I'm gesturing with my hands and the camera resets and then just starts it'll start tracking me. And so, now it's if I go like this, it doesn't move. So that's one thing, is if I move my hand a certain way, that's the signal to the camera that, oh, now it wants me to track his face.
Wow. You give your tech way too much permission.
I didn't. Okay.
You didn't?
No. I don't want to go into the RoboCop sequence when they're testing out the.
It's a great sequence. All right. Well, the debate was great. I thought Dave did great. He did win according to official Oxford rules, and I'm not surprised.
Okay, I didn't know if we were going to spill the beans. Since you said that, sorry, go ahead and finish your thought, and then
No, that's it. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, folks, Dave's kind of undefeated at this point, as far as I don't think he got a TKO against Douglas Murray. I think that was, went to split. It was split decision, but I think Dave won. And
it was.
There were plenty of people voting that, oh no, Douglas Murray won. Whereas other ones, it was even the people who agreed with the other side, everyone was, oh yeah, that person got trounced.
Also, not to mix metaphors, but it seems like Douglas Murray was doing nothing but scoring goals on his own net over and over and over, which was just weird.
Right. But so I'm just saying, Alex, he's Cato's guy on immigration. So this dumb stand-up comedian that, just went to Wikipedia or something before talking to, going on Rogan's podcast because they're bro. It's, Dave officially won according to the metrics. And you could say, oh, well, Dave's fans all went in there and deliberately voted the one way and then changed their vote to, okay, I can't prove that didn't happen, but you watch the whole debate. It's not like this was obviously fixed. You know what I mean? Dave did appear to do well. And like we said, clearly the single best exchange, in the brawl, the melee, not just their prepared opening statements, but where they're going back and forth, Dave clearly won that exchange.
AndAlex clearly had supporters in the room. You could hear him.
Right. It wasn't just a sampling thing. So anyway, I'm just saying that. And then also just to piggyback that, so Dave was recently on, oh shoot, I forget what is Talking Points. Does that sound like a thing?
I know what you're talking about, and it's very close to that.
Okay. So in any event, with this, and they were talking about, and
Breaking
Dave was just,
points.
Yes, I think that's what it was. Breaking wind. Yes. And anyway, they just were doing all, and Dave just was matter-of-factly talking about. Now, I think the problem is that the typical right winger, they misdiagnosed what happened with the woke thing. They think that the left conquered or the liberals or vice versa, and that they went through and there was the march to the institutions and this and that, and there was Gramsci and did it, and he's just dropping stuff about that. Not that I'm an expert in all that, but it was, I did a deep dive in all the postmodernism and all that stuff a few years ago, during COVID when everyone got in everything, because what else could we do? We were just locked in our houses, and I didn't catch Dave saying anything wrong. and he knows way the heck more about Israel, Palestine than I. So I'm just saying, like, the more he speaks on stuff, I'm like, this is maybe the most informed guy we have in terms of just going out and just talking about stuff with the public. He should probably run for president as a libertarian.
That'll be a step down. No, I think you're right. He is really handling his business as a persuasive communicator so well. I'm so proud of the guy. Not that I have any right to be, but I'm impressed as all get out with him. And he also not only is calm, cool, collected, can make an argument, can formulate it and communicate it, but he's got those stand-up comic skills that just makes his points just land so effectively with an audience. And Alex did do a good job. I mean, I thought his arguments were specious, but he stayed on message, stayed on point, kept delivering, kept hammering, and I thought he could win.
Yeah. I didn't know the outcome. Like, no one had spoiled it, and I waited. The fact that Dave didn't congratulate Alex on winning made me think Dave must have won, and he's just being gracious by not mentioning that he won. But I didn't know until the end. Like, I was waiting with bated breath to hear what Gene was going to say, who the winner was, and who would get the Tootsie Roll. Also, you reminded me. I don't want to spoil the joke, but Alex did do well. Dave had a funny line during the Q&A.
Yes.
Dave had a very funny, but it was characteristically Dave line, and then Alex quickly retorted that was also laugh out, like Dave even kind of not doubled over, that's a strong term, but laughed and leaned forward in his chair. So anyway, Alex impressed me that he was funnier than I thought he was going to be.
Yeah, I agree.
He's funnier than he is on Twitter. I'll say that.
Not funny at all there. All right, let's pivot to Michael Malice's recent appearance on Brett Weinstein's Dark Horse podcast. And most of
hear Malice is funnier on Twitter than he was in the Dark Horse podcast.
No, he's pretty funny in both. All right, we've got several clips, so let's just dive right in. Here we go.
I know you to be a highly intelligent person and a very thoughtful person. You don't reach conclusions lightly or reflexively.
But?
No.
Okay.
There's no but. Okay. So therefore, when you say that you are an anarchist, my mind throws an error.
Okay.
Okay. Because I think there are fatal arguments against anarchism as I understand it.
Okay.
Now, when I say my mind throws a fatal error, I'm not saying,
I understand,
Michael, you got this wrong, and I'm going to tell you why.
I understand.
I'm saying something is off.
Okay,
Either
sure.
my understanding of anarchism is off, or my understanding of what you're saying when you...
Sure.
So
yeah.
Can you fill in, what does it mean that you're an anarchist?
Sure. Anarchism, if it can be reduced to one sentence, is the thesis that you do not speak for me, and everything else is application. So what it means, it's not like voting Republican. It's a worldview that regards political authority as always inherently illegitimate, and everything else is just kind of application.
Political authority
is always inherently illegitimate, and everything else is an extrapolation of that.
Okay, so...
And I'll give you an example of how everyone, to some extent, believes this.
Okay.
Let's suppose you like your weed, right? Let's pretend. You and I go to Singapore, and there it's like, what country where it's grossly illegal? Like Dubai, I think it's illegal there. And we're sitting there with some friend, he busts out a joint. And we might ask ourselves, okay, what are the odds we're going to get caught? What are the consequences? How likely is it, blah, blah. But at no point in your head will it be like, well, the government here says it's wrong, so I'm not going to do it because of that, right? That's never going to enter your head as consideration.
Right. It's not wrong because the government here says it's wrong. If I think it's right back home, then I think the fact that the government here says it's wrong is annoying.
Right. And it's certainly of no moral relevance.
Yeah.
That is the anarchist approach to law.
All right. You want to respond first or me?
You're up.
Okay. So what I thought was interesting about that whole clip is it underscored, I've said this, I don't know when I came up with this formulation, but it was a while ago, where I said there are at least two types of people who are anarchists, particularly if we're talking about in the Rothbardian vein or flavor of it. And I said, there's one kind of person who says, nobody else can impose rules on me. Nobody else can tell me what to do. I make my own rules. And then there's another kind of person that says there are objective moral and legal rules, and they apply to everyone, not just to me and the other citizens, but also to the government officials. And that's why I'm an anarchist, because I don't think that just because the government, we have an election, the government does it, that therefore massive theft is okay because it's taxation, or that massive slavery is okay because it's the draft, and so on. So there, it's not because, hey, who are you to impose rules on me? It's that, no, these are the rules that we teach our kids at the park when they're 5. You can't take people's stuff. It's not that, oh, why don't you and your friends have an election, and then if enough of you vote for it, then you can take Susie's bike. No, it's her property, period. End of story. You can't do it without a permission. And yet adults don't behave like that when it comes to the state, right? So there, it's not that you're just saying, hey, there's no rules. No, people, there's ownership. That's Susie's bike, right? So anyway, and Malice clearly there is of the first variety, and saying the reason I'm an anarchist is because I don't acknowledge that other people can tell me what to do. And it's just a matter of expedience. And then what's interesting, last thing I'll say on this, Adam, is piggybacking on the Soho discussion, it's interesting. So if 95% of Americans don't want immigrants coming in, is that really of no relevance whatsoever for an outside immigrant trying to sneak in? They say, well, I don't care what the U.S. government and ICE says, because that's just a bunch of arbitrary political authority. So that seems to undercut Dave's whole stance, right? Like, do we have to get in and decide, well, if it's within the consistent with the will of the vast majority of people and it's public property and blah, 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 there, you actually are kind of stealing or, doing things against the property owner's wishes. And so that should be of moral relevance to you. So I'm just saying it gets really messy. Sorry, one last thing I'll say, Adam. Recently, Tom Woods, in response to this woke rights stuff, said something. It was funny because you know how Tom normally is very calm and collected, but occasionally he gets really mad at people and he says stuff that's aggressive. And he said something, this is a paraphrase, but the spirit's correct, said something like, for a bunch of these people that used to be leftist Democrat or liberal Democrats and then switched over because, hey, the left left me and whatever, maybe pay the common courtesy of keeping your mouth shut for 5 years before you start lecturing us on how the right should behave and who should be policed or what, And he said something like that. And then he used the analogy. He said, like, if I went to a foreign country, I would not start bossing them around, telling them how to run things. I would be, out of courtesy and being a respectful guest. And that, I agree with everything Tom said there. Also, the jabs he was indirectly taking at James Lindsay. But I don't think that squares with what Malice. No, Malice is say, I don't have any respect whatsoever for people if I go to their country. Just what I can get away with, and it's expediency, is what I mean, he wouldn't like break into somebody's house, but anyway, there's my thoughts, and I'll stop.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what Michael Malice would say if you directly asked him that question. I think he comes off as a lot more Camp A and brusque, and I'm going to do what I want, I don't care, rather than the Rothbardian take. I mean, there's a difference between his image and maybe what he actually thinks, but who knows? In that clip, I like very much making the distinction between morality and law. And I love how Brett Weinstein is just really open-minded. He has concerns about these things, but he's listening. I think anarchism, if it was properly explained to him several times in good faith, I think his evolutionary biologist bottom-up order appreciation for that framework, I think it would really help him, sort of get sort of intuitively the appeal here. But his problem is he doesn't see how, absent a monopolistic government, you can have dispute resolution of various kinds and protect people from harms in areas where torts won't do it. And gosh darn it, you just need a monopoly series of regulations.
You're right. I was going to say this, I forgot that it is interesting that Brett just went right along with that. Like, oh yeah, I can see why. It was funny that I, as the anarcho-capitalist watching, was like, I'm not sure I follow Malice down this path. To give one more example that just popped into my head. I talk about the Temple of Doom a lot. Have you seen that movie, Indiana Jones, the second one? Of course. Okay. So do you remember in the beginning when, they come on the plane or whatever and they are in that village or something, and the people are holding a banquet in their honor and they're trying to serve them all this disgusting stuff. And, what's her name? Willie Scott doesn't want to eat it. And Indy's just like, this is more than these people eat in a week. You will eat this, and he's, you're embarrassing yourself and me or whatever, that kind of stuff. So not the same, but I'm just saying there, you can, see why, Indy's point is when we are guests over here, we're going to follow these people's rules and customs. If they don't go along with ripping people's hearts out of their kids' chests and enslaving kids and stuff, that's where Indy draws the line. But I'm just saying there is a sense in which, we're not going to do that in these other people. So again, I think I've made I think there's a lot more room there for, it arguably is immoral if you're in some other country and doing something that 95% of their people would be horrified if they found out you were doing.
Yeah, I think it's bad manners. Don't go out of your way to be rude. And also, and perhaps more importantly, I can't believe Short Round didn't have a bigger career. Shall we play the next clip?
Yes.
The NDAA of 2012, which is a giant omnibus bill that we pass every year, the National Defense Authorization Act, had these two egregious provisions in it that allowed for the government to eliminate all of your constitutional rights, except maybe your Third Amendment right to not have soldiers in your house, based on the executive's unchecked declaration that somebody was a terrorist.
Yeah.
So it basically created an emperor. And when these provisions were challenged, the Obama administration actually argued that it didn't matter because they already had that power. Strangely, they didn't even deny the ability to haul you off any street in the world and detain you indefinitely. So you can, but the key thing is this becomes tyrannical based solely on whether people accept it. In other words, under ordinary circumstances, our system has a check, which is
the Second Amendment.
Well,
That's the check.
that's
the point.
That's
of the
the real
Amendment,
check.
right? Yes.
But the other check is supposed to be a court has to decide whether that interpretation is correct. But if I say that actually once you're a terrorist, then you don't have a right to access to the court, then the point is, well, that becomes tyranny as soon as the people who do the hauling you off the street accept that a court doesn't get to check it.
And I would ask people listening to this, do you have any doubt that if Officer Harris or Hillary Clinton was in court with you and was asked, do you think members of the NRA are terrorists, that they would say yes, legally?
Right.
Of course they would. Of course they would. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They wouldn't pause for a second.
Right. I think your strongest point in favor of anarchism is that government makes the exact problems I'm trying to solve worse when it becomes malignant, and I don't have a credible answer for how you prevent malignancy.
Sure. And you also pointed out that all governments so far on Earth are malignant.
At the moment, they are all malignant.
Okay,
Yes,
right, okay.
I believe so.
Okay, great.
I do not believe that has always been the case.
Okay.
As I was hoping, it does leave me with a real question because I don't see an alternative to advocating for as limited and elegant a governance structure as can be produced.
But the only thing that limits governments is guns.
I agree that the Second Amendment may rival the First for its importance to maintaining a free society. Absolutely. So I believe that. It may be the only credible answer to who will watch the watchers,
Right.
is that ultimately we have to maintain the right to look out for ourselves.
People have to have consequences, yes.
Yeah, people have to have consequences. And
Why wouldn't they, right? If I do something bad and I got away, if I steal from your store and nothing happens, I'm going to do it again. Why wouldn't I?
right. I mean,
All right, I have a 1 sentence comment, and then I'll hold my fire, so to speak.
Okay.
Until
But by the way, just to clarify, those were clips that we merged together, folks, for the obvious reason that they were similar, that they occurred at distant points in the interview.
Yeah, and there was a real cool transition graphic for those of you who got to see it. I just thought it was interesting that Michael Malice insisted twice, maybe more, and Brett Weinstein agreed that at the end of the day, retaliatory defensive gun violence is the only check against tyranny. I did not expect A, Malice to make that point so forcefully, and B, for Brett to say, yeah, I get it. That surprised me.
Yep, same here on both points. I should probably also clarify, Malice said a lot that I liked in this interview, but just the way stuff works here, it makes more sense for us to showcase the stuff we disagree with. And
Sure,
also my
sure.
earlier joke when I said Malice is funnier on Twitter than he was here, I meant because he's really funny on Twitter, just to be clear. Like,
Nice.
I'm realizing people don't know this might be coming off like, wow, Bob really has it up as, being his bonnet with Michael Malice. Okay. So yeah, full disclosure, folks, I'm a pacifist. So guess what? I really disagree with what Malice said there. Number one, I think it's wrong, and I'll explain in a moment why I do think it's wrong. But also, strategically, he's now, he's on the Dark Horse Pocket. Hey, anarchist, what's this all about? Oh, it's nobody can tell me what to do, and ultimately, I just got to get enough people to go shoot you if you try to impose your will on me, statist. And I don't think that's going to win over a lot of people who weren't already anarchists tuning into this. Right? Again, the other stuff that we're not going to showcase here, where Michael was doing a good job, like just walking Brett through like the difference between eBay and the state and stuff like was great. And I did a lot, but those just the key things we're highlighting here. I don't think that's, again, I think it's wrong, but also I think it's strategically unwise. So why is it wrong? Well, quickest way I can make it is when Michael was there saying, if I go rob someone's store, there's a lot you can do besides shoot someone. And in fact, Malice put a lot of weight on eBay and why that's not a government. If you sell somebody a fraudulent thing on eBay, no one hunts you down and shoots you. eBay works without guns.
How do you
right?
know,
And
Bob?
you know how many people I've ripped off on eBay. So, yeah, right. I probably shouldn't have said that. Now people are like, wait, are you kidding me? You don't get shot? I was under the impression all these crazy Texans would hunt me down. So, again, let me put it this way. If the government were to grab me and throw me in prison on some trumped up charges, I would rather have, I meant to really think through the numbers, and I did, so I'll exaggerate. I would be willing to take something, but I would much rather have 100,000 people who were really just outraged at what happened to me, and they, like, every person on the weekend would like write letters to the editor and would make, slogans and and just do things to keep my name alive in the public's eye or whatever, just to keep, referring to, like how you had the free Ross and stuff in your thing. I would much rather have 100,000 people doing that than like 10,000 people who were willing to try to come in and shoot up a bunch of guards and get me out. Because if you did that, it's not like my problem would be over. I would still be a fugitive. And then now the American people would be extra sure I must be a bad guy if my, followers came and shot up a bunch of people to rescue me and stuff. So, last thing I'll say on this, and I would always get into this with the people who were like saying that McVeigh was a false flag and stuff like that. And that may have been, I'm not, so don't misunderstand me, folks. I'm not taking a stand on whether, the Oklahoma City thing was as it was portrayed in the media or not. My point though is there was a large overlap between people who wanted to, who were trying to decide at what point am I just going to, exercise my Second Amendment right, put it that way, and who thought, oh yeah, the government has all these false flag operations where they make it look like people attacked them when really they didn't, because the government knows that's the way to expand its power. And it's like, pick one, guys. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, since you brought it up, two things that were just weird. Brett Weinstein literally was having a problem with the definition of government, such that he was arguing that eBay is literally a government as he sees it. And I guess that's part of, I don't know, his evolutionary training, looking at species and what defines this and that. And it brings up a point that is just so weird about the way Michael Malice discusses anarchism. And I know he's a real smart guy, and it bothers me that I don't quite get it, because he doesn't do it the way I would. He points out how bad the government is at doing it, various things, conflict resolution. And he also will point out how free market solutions currently handle these sorts of things. But that's all under the current umbrella of a government that's a monopoly. So I don't think those punches land. And he doesn't focus on the fact that government is a monopoly, and all the problems inherent in monopolies come with it. All the incentives being completely misaligned for the actors within that institution. Doesn't really talk about private property and its virtues and free association. It's weird. He comes at it really obliquely. It's like judo or something, and I just can't figure out. Do you think it works? Do you think his solution, his way is more effective? Because like Brett Weinstein is a really inquiring mind, and he was really having trouble with the anarchy thing, where you can't get order. He was having problem figuring out how you'd get again conflict resolution without a king, essentially, or some kind of structure. So it's like, what do you think? You've probably seen Malice do this sort of thing before. Do you think his judo works?
Okay, so the quick answer is like when you said, I mean, he didn't do it the way I would, and I chuckled. I don't know if you caught my expression, but it reminded me when Tom Woods had Pat Buchanan on his show, and I think this was right after Trump got reelected or something, and Tom said, Pat, if you could just, you had 10 minutes to have a sit down with Donald Trump and just to give him advice or blah blah blah. What would you tell him, or something like that? Or no, maybe he was asking for advice on how you win the election. I think that's what it was. Like, so the election hadn't happened yet, the re-election campaign. And Buchanan said something like, well, just keep in mind that, Donald's in the White House and I'm here talking to Tom Woods or something like that.
Right.
And I screwed the joke up. He must have won because he was in the White House already. So anyway, but that's what I was thinking, that if Malice saw this, he would say, okay, you're talking to Bob Murphy. I'm, doing all these big shows. So
I'm not saying I'm right and he's wrong. Well, like, here's an example. He's trying to explain anarchism to Brett, and he says, here's an example: cuisine, language, physics, art, music, mathematics, which is weird because clearly what Brett is interested in is dispute resolution, and those things aren't, violence and law and security. And
there's no way in the world I can criticize him there, because that's exactly what I do, like at my Mises University lectures. When I do like, the point of going through those is to show you can have order without some group of people being in charge, right?
It should be
then you can establish that.
It should be part of it, but he was
ironically that you don't need guns
right.
to enforce order and any of those other ones. So why would you need it? So that's kind of where I guess we've come full circle. Right. I think if your point is going to be, you can have a fact of the matter that the community objectively knows who's in the right and who's in the wrong, and all these other fields, and we know who the genuine experts are in physics, and it's not because, people have guns backing that up or something, or that we have Pyrrhic elections. There's other ways of that manifesting itself, and that's their superiority demonstrating itself. Then I say, likewise, that's why we don't need guns, when it comes to who is the legitimate owner of that house.
And like, Michael Malice gets that. Like Brett Weinstein, he had an example of a modern pork producer who's got these lagoons full of pork, bovine and porcine waste. And what happens when this...
Is that the adjective for when a pork or a pig?
I'm making up words at this point.
Pork-bellied pig?
Anyway, he was saying that what about the nefarious actor here who just vaporizes or atomizes all that waste, and it gets up into the atmosphere and pollutes everybody's property? And Michael Malice just handled that kind of obliquely. He's like, well, put anarchism aside. How's that handled now? And then at one point he said, this should be handled by a tort, and, the pork producer has a bank. Well, the bank could just hand out the money. But he handled it so weirdly obliquely.
I know what you're talking about, and I don't know if it had just been this interview. You're right. And you didn't know anything. I could have just chalked it up to he knew that there's a lot of material we could cover here, and I don't want to get stuck on this one example for 20 minutes. That I didn't disagree with anything Malice said there, but I understand what you mean, that to someone who doesn't already know where you're coming from, that seemed like you were just teasing them, but not telling them like what's the answer.
It's a technique. Yeah. I've seen him do it a handful of other times.
Right.
It's on purpose. And I
agree. That's what I'm saying. If you just saw this, you might not be sure. You're right. So I'm not saying it was merely a watching the clock and time management. That you're right. He does that. I know what you mean. I'll give you a few examples of his style, and what I meant with my earlier self-deprecating remark is, if what we're saying is his method the best way to reach the masses about anarchy, he would say, well, I had a best-selling book, that was really high on Amazon on the Anarchist, whatever thing. And what do you want me to tell you? I'm doing Rogan. More people have heard about anarchy from me than you guys. So what do you want me to say?
Point taken, Mr. Buchanan. I'm not in the White House. All right, you want to get to clip 3?
Yeah, I guess what we could say is he gets people intrigued, and then they go Google, and then they find us. And they're like, oh, that Malice guy teased us, just setting us like he's kind of the bump, and then you're the set, nice spike. Or
Yeah,
you can be the spike if you want. You're taller.
No. Well, I'm a little taller, but you're more forceful. Yeah, that's got to be it. That's the only explanation that makes sense. All right, moving on along, folks. Clip 3.
Yourself as an egalitarian?
Well, it depends. I've heard that term challenged, and I guess the question is, depending on what the definition is. What I would say the definition is, the one that I resonate with.
I'll ask you, I'll simplify it. Do you hold equality as a high value for you?
Quality of opportunity, level playing field.
That's still communism, buddy.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is. You know who came up with that term? You know who came up with that term?
You tell me.
Richard Ely, who was Woodrow Wilson's mentor, who founded the American Education Association, whose goal it was to stop liberalism and to introduce socialist elements into the capitalist economy. So there's no such thing as equality of anything. And hold on, let me finish my thought.
Okay.
And what the goal should be for free-loving people is maximizing opportunity. Equality is of no utility in this context, or in any context, roughly.
Well, I think you and I are stumbling over a definition.
Okay, let's go.
Because my point is structurally equal access, that the structure cannot be biased.
Why?
Because
every structure is going to be biased to some degree.
Yes, it is. So it is a standard to which we aspire. It is not a realistic endpoint.
Okay, so let me ask you, let's take this another question.
Yeah.
Which would you rather have? Okay, a house with, there's 3 people who have houses.
Yeah.
So on this street, a house worth 50,000, 50,000, 50,000, right? Or on this street, house worth 200, 250, and 40.
Right.
Which would you rather have?
But this is a straw man.
No, because people, no. Jonathan Haidt asked this question.
Okay.
And people chose A, a lot of them.
Sure.
That's what I'm asking you. It's not a straw man. What do you mean by straw man? I'm asking you.
You think there's any chance in the world that I'm going to select A?
Yes, because a lot of people do.
But you know me.
But you said you're egalitarian.
I'm not a commie.
Well, I don't know, man. That's a lot of commies say.
No, I'm not.
They said that in the 50s too.
Before we continue, let me ask you, what did you think that, so was scenario A was 3 houses that were $50,000 each?
Yeah.
And then B was, what did you think the numbers were?
Something like 100, 150, and then 40 for the last one.
Okay. The 40 is the critical one. Okay.
Lower than 50. Yeah, that's my
right. It's definitely. Okay. Do you want me to respond first?
Go ahead.
So I tried Googling to I said, Jonathan Haidt, 3 houses example. I couldn't find. To me, that was a weird survey. Like, not that it was mixing things together. I'm going to go ahead and I guess you can call me a commie. It's not, I'll put it this way. It's not obvious to me that B is preferable to A. And I mean, because really what's preferable is, I would say, well, whatever is the voluntary market outcome. You know what I mean? Like if the way that we got to B, scenario B, was because 2 of the neighbors robbed from the first guy, and then he had to sell his house, and then that's how they bought, clearly we would all.
I read Jonathan Haidt in one of his books talk about this social studies survey type thing. And I think that Michael Malice didn't reproduce it quite well enough. I think all 3 in case B were above 50, but the differences were more stark.
Yeah.
Like 70 and 4 million.
Yeah.
And 20 million.
That's exactly where I was going with this. That to me, the way to really isolate.
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
Is it prosperity versus, is everybody better off, but some people are way better off?
We're trying to make
the other one.
We're trying to make people signal that they really are envious and they don't want that to exist.
Right. Or they don't like inequality per se. Whereas if B has more inequality and the poorest person is worse off,
Right.
then that's not obvious why. You get what I'm saying? And again,
totally.
we're stipulating that everything we're obeying property rights and blah blah blah, and that's just to say what kind of a world would you rather be in? Because you could exaggerate it, because one's 50,000, 50,000, 50,000, and the second one is the two guys have 50 houses of 51,000, and the other guy has a house that's 1,000. Or sorry, the two guys have houses that are 20 million, and the third guy has a house that's worth $1. Am I a commie still if I say, no, I don't like that outcome? And yet that's where Malice is leading us. So I think, the way to do it cleanly is to make them all go up. But one guy's house is just 50,001, and then the other two are 4 million. And then that's really isolating that. Anyway, I beat this to death.
I think Malice put his own spin on it. And I think the original, it wasn't like that. It truly identified what people were selecting when they selected A.
Right. And it's also, again, interesting that Brett was like, I mean, you think I would possibly say, and me, I'm going, yeah, I might. What?
The only thing I'll say on this clip is that
who the heck can live in a house that's only $40,000?
For this equality of opportunity thing to be a standard to which we aspire, which is, I think, the way you phrased it. I think that's terrible. I think, like you just intimated, you stick with the tenets of a free society, property rights, freedom of association, exchange, all that stuff, whatever flows out of the non-aggression principle. Because any intervention that you make as a government to try and steer outcomes or even level playing fields, however you try to define it, if they're not part of a free society, well, those interventions themselves are just a little bit of tyranny. And as I say often, too much probably, the means are the ends. You can't violate freedom to make a freer society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also thought Malice was a little bit too glib there. Like, I guess the principle you could hold up is equality before the law. Yeah. And I would say I'm okay with saying, that's the sense of which equality. Yeah. And, you could get in there and say, oh, but don't you agree, Bob, that the rich people would have better lawyers? So it's like, yes, but switch it to like the NBA and to say the same rules should be applied to all the teams equally. I think that's clearly the standard.
Except for LeBron James. Yeah, I agree.
And I've heard people say stuff like the refs would let, Jordan get away with pushing off guys and stuff, like the one famous buzzer beater he hits. I knew guys in high school like, oh, that was such a BS move that he pushed the guy off him, and I was like, screw you, it's the GOAT. But
what does traveling even really mean when you get right down to it?
So, but anyway, but my point is there, like, and you can argue about it and say in Prague, but even there, if you want to say, oh, but in the real world the refs are going to be biased and like there's a home team advantage and stuff like that. Okay, but we can all agree it shouldn't be, right? And if it got too much out of hand, then the people would stop watching it. All right. So anyway, I don't think this idea that because the way leftists have used equality in some applications, like that's just, out the window. And in any event, so I don't call myself an egalitarian because I think that would be misleading, and it's not. But again, I think Malice is trying to go too far when he says you shouldn't be an egalitarian because there is no dimension of human interaction whatsoever where equality could ever possibly be the ideal.
That's what I'm saying. Like Malice does that a lot. And I'm like, you could have met Brett where he was going and not have lost anything. Like, I don't agree with Brett that you should aspire to, however he rephrased it. But yeah, if the aspiration was equality before the law, that's not stupid to have that as your North Star, even knowing there's going to be a sense in which you can never get there. It's not a crazy thing to think of that's important. It just means you shouldn't necessarily write a law to try and fix it, because that violates even more tenets of a free society.
Yep.
All right, last clip.
I feel like what you're doing is you are pointing to the vast collection of governmental abuses as if they invalidate the possibility of government being effective. And maybe they do, but I'm not convinced that no matter how many examples you come up with of cases where the government is disrupting function, that they invalidate the idea that sometimes government is the right and only solution to a problem.
But right now we talked about fire department. You agreed we could have another alternative. Post
I
office.
agree that another alternative is possible.
Sure.
We haven't established that it's preferable.
Fine, but the point is, it's possible. You talked about the post office. You said right away someone could do that privately. So where is it that only government is the? You said only. So find me the space where government is the only answer.
Okay. How about the protection of fisheries?
Okay, I'm not, let's talk about this because I'm not familiar with the protection of fisheries. So please, here's how to do it. Isn't that the case right now where certain entities have ownership over bodies of water
Well,
or fishing rights?
no, we have actually anarchy in the open oceans.
Okay.
And the result is the collapse of populations of fish because there's no disincentive for bycatch.
Anarchy in the oceans. Are you going to buy that definition there, Bob?
Okay, lots of ways to respond to this. So, again, it was interesting. You are pointing out the things that Malice did that surprised you, and I was surprised by. Well, you said you were surprised as well that the things Brett agreed to with no problem. Like, oh yeah, ultimately we might have to, use Second Amendment on all these politicians and stuff. But also, I mean, you need government for fire departments. It's, I guess if they don't get there quickly enough, you have to resort to guns. But in any event, like, hurry up, put those boots on, mister. This thing's loaded. So, right. This is, Walter Block would do this a lot too, where he would say, we do have anarchy right now, anarchy among nations, like that, like the lack of a one world government.
Yeah.
He would say, and I'd say, right. And we've just had a constant state of warfare and 2 world wars. But other than that, like Walter, what would the world have to look like for you to, say, oh, this isn't a good example. And also it's consisting of a bunch of states. And so that's weird. Like, doesn't that show that, okay, states can get along, so anyway, this is kind of weird, that move. So, right. What I would say to Brett is, number one, are you therefore saying we need to have one world government because that's the only way to solve this problem? And I don't think he is going to say that. He's going to say, no, the governments need to come up with some treaties and blah, blah, blah. And say, okay, and the fact that they haven't, doesn't that show that relying on governments, like, isn't this just yet another example where the government is failing, right? That it's not that, governments don't think they have the authority to write treaties with each other. That's just not important to them. They don't care. They're not doing it. So again, like what he's pointing to is when Malice, point blank asked him, where he didn't say, oh, the control of nuclear weapons. No, he says fisheries. And that's clearly an area where the governments are failing. And what he thinks, so what would have to happen for him to realize, no, government isn't the solution here?
Yeah, it's weird. Michael Malice here did say things that were correct. I don't think they're persuasive, but essentially it's like until the populace cares about these things, no structure is going to fix it, government or anarchy. And I don't think it would have been persuasive either. But as soon as Brett said we have anarchy in the oceans, I'd be like, well, no, we don't. It's more like anarcho-tyranny. Not only are the property rights not protected, but they're disallowed by force. I mean, that's whatever it is that Michael Malice and you and I think about an anarchist society. It's the opposite of that. You're not allowed to have any private property and then trade fishery rights and then, aim towards the maximizing the future value of this resource, which is the problem here. It's a tragedy of the commons sort of thing.
Right, exactly. On this, I don't know if I ever talked about it with you on these crossovers, but in college, I was on the debate team. I know folks you're thinking that we weren't. Yeah, this was off. This wasn't the football season when I was a starting quarterback, and the resolution. I think I only did it one, I don't know, semester or year. What the resolution? The team won. Like I said, it was a partner and I. It was my roommate. He got me into it because he had doing it. It was something about the Earth's ocean resources should be better managed or something like that. I forget what the exact resolution. It was very open-ended, gobbledygook stuff. And so when we had the affirmative, we made a case for privatizing the oceans. And we were undefeated with that because when the kids heard it, they just thought it was the nuttiest idea. And they were just coming up with, the goofiest, dumb guy 101 objections. And, you know, it was me, and my roommate was no slouch in Austro-libertarianism himself, and we just blow them apart. Like, yeah, we thought of that, dude. You know, and it was just merciless. People didn't know what hit them. So we were undefeated on that. And yeah, there's things like there were two approaches. One is you could do like a cordoning off a volume of seawater and just say, yeah, this company or whatever owns this volume of the water, and anything that's in it at any moment is our property. Or for like real big things that were nomadic, for lack of a better word, you could tag them. You know, like so some huge whale or something, you could put a radio transmitter on them, and then that, you know, mark it. And we had analogs too, you know, cattle on open land, and, you know, the different ways of dealing with property rights there. That, you know, you could brand your steer, and then if your neighbor found it, you know, he should give it back to you, and that kind of stuff. He wouldn't say, oh, it came on my property, so it's mine.
Yeah, increasing tech usually solves these problems if they seem insolvable. And like you were just saying, the branding and then the invention of barbed wire just solved so much that made it seem like cattle and land just couldn't be owned properly.
Mm-hmm. And like you're saying, I really want to double click at him that it's not that we actually have anarchy in governments just say, no, we have nothing to do with what happens in the ocean. If some company went out there and established and said, okay, we're homesteading this volume of seawater, and any creature in this is ours, you know, government, and then they had a bunch of gunboats and stuff there to protect their property. Eventually the governments of the world, they would send their navies and be like, no, you can't do that. Like, what are you talking about? So,
yeah, and eventually it would be next Tuesday. I mean, they'd be quick, I venture. It's interesting that you've got a guy like Brett Weinstein, former lefty, admitting that as far as he knows, all current governments are malignant. He holds out hope for the past, like maybe they weren't always this way. And he also holds out hope for the future, that we could have monopoly government that's better. And he said something like that several times in this conversation. And I would have expected Michael Malice to jump on that and then point at the nub of the problem, which is monopoly force itself. And he just never swung at that ball. And he does that on purpose, clearly. I just don't understand why.
When you said that before, I'm not certain. By the way, folks, on the previous crossover, Adam said that Oren Cass said something, and I doubted him. And then afterwards, Adam was right. So I do want to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Bob.
I thought Malice did say at some point something like, I mean, in other contexts, we know why giving the government a monopoly on, you know, making cars or food would be a bad idea. I thought he said it was a real quick line, but I thought he did at least use the term monopoly and to say why we normally wouldn't want the government having a monopoly.
But in the mind of a guy like Brett, food and cars and blah, 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 it's not that important. What he's concerned about is dispute resolution, and he thinks you need a monopolist to handle that. And like handling pollution and whatever pharma's doing. And
I mean, if what you're saying is Malice did not carefully spell out dispute resolution and law enforcement in an ANCAP regime, I agree with you. But I'm saying he did explain the problem with the government doing it is just like you wouldn't want to have government have monopoly in anything. Oh shoot, there was something else I was going to say. What did you ask me about? What were we just talking about?
Fish, barbed wire, brands.
Oh, the empiricist. The clip you even just played there, Brett came really close to saying, no matter how many examples you show me, I am never going to be persuaded. It was like, aren't you an empiricist? Like, what does he have to prove it? You know what I mean? Like, what? That seems like a high bar that I don't care how many examples you show me. What I wanted Michael to do, I keep switching between calling him Michael and Malice.
Me too.
Is to say, okay, you agree right now, literally every government on earth is malignant in your term. What were the good ones? Like, when did it work? And then, you know, among other things, he might have been able to say, well, they had massive slavery though, like depending on how far back, I don't know when Brett would have gone back to, but I'm sure you could point to stuff that was not great at that point.
A funny line, if Michael Malice had thought of it, is when he says that. So you're telling me that all governments that you're aware of are malignant, but you hold out hope for one in the future that could be better. Is this the kind of scientific rigor with which you approach your own evolutionary discipline?
Yeah. Right.
But I'm being mean. I
it's
really
like the
admire.
good governments have gone extinct. according to.
Maybe he does think that.
It's
I
not
mean,
an
he probably does
evolutionary
think that.
stable strategy.
Like maybe something killed it, like media or the printing press, or I don't know.
That really is a thing, an evolutionarily stable strategy, ESS. I studied
That's a
game
thing?
theory. It is a
All
thing. So because they developed game theory and then they applied it to biology, and so the idea is like if you want to model turtle, hawk, and dove, let's say, like those are the three strategies, and you could have a population with different payoffs, and like two hawks find each other, and it's bad because they both take a lot of damage. You know,
I get it.
Anyway. So
And the doves
then
are
you
totally peaceful. And what does the turtle do? Just hide?
yes, and so anyway, you can just come up with. So it's not that they're rationally choosing; it's just like they're randomly assigning the strategies, and then you just see what would be a Nash equilibrium over time, and then that would make sense for, the predator-prey relationships and blah 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 out in nature because the genes aren't thinking 5 moves ahead and rationally, using backwards induction.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, if we haven't gummed this conversation to death for you, I do highly recommend it because Michael Malice is brilliant and funny, and Brett Weinstein I like a whole lot. I like the way he thinks. I like how open-minded he is. I like how smart he is. I feel like he's the kind of guy who's moved an awful long way in our direction, and he could end up right here with us, and he's a pretty big voice. It's just I think he needs to hear a lot of different arguments from a lot of different vectors, angles. And I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of years go by and he might call himself an anarchist too. Who knows?
Once he realizes that no, every single government for the last 16 years has been malignant, and I see no way out of this logjam.
Yeah, logjam indeed. Any final words of wisdom or otherwise?
Again, for both things, I would encourage people to watch both. And and the stuff with the immigration, I am being sincere. I think self-described libertarians, if you want to move the ball forward on immigration, should grapple with that spectrum that I laid out there. I'm just curious to hear what people have to say about that, because I think that is shedding some light on this issue. But clearly, Alex and Dave did not settle the matter decisively.
Public property is a Frankenstein monster, and we should kill it with fire. Go check out those two conversations, or the conversation and the debate. We'll put links in the show note page of the videos you were watching, or go to bobmurphyshow.com for show notes, and also go to heymannature.com for my Substack. I'll have show notes there also, and also articles. This has been awesome, Bob. I'd like to thank you as always. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll catch you next time.
So long, folks.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.